My name is Amanda, and until last month, I thought I had the perfect job. I worked hard, stayed late, and built a reputation for solving problems nobody else could handle. Everyone knew me as reliable, smart, and calm under pressure. But apparently, that made me a threat. It started the morning Mr. Gibson, my manager, called me into his office. His face was tight, his smile forced. "Amanda, we need to talk," he said. "You've been overstepping your responsibilities." I frowned. Overstepping. I only did my job better than anyone else. "I don't understand," I said. "You know," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "Things in this company require subtlety, diplomacy. Not everyone can handle their position properly, and sometimes it's better for people to step aside quietly." Step aside quietly. The words hit me like ice. He slid a resignation form across the desk. "Sign it. It's better for everyone if you leave without complications." I stared at the paper. My heart raced, and my mind spun. Step aside quietly. After years of hard work. Then I realized something important. He thought he could scare me. He thought he could control me. But he didn't know the full story. And he didn't know how far I could go. I left his office, the resignation form burning a hole in my bag. The hallway felt unusually long. Every step echoed like a warning. I could hear the whispers of coworkers, the faint hum of printers, and the distant chatter of people unaware that a storm had just begun. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I couldn't let him see that he had shaken me. I walked straight to my desk, cleared it, and started packing my personal belongings. My hands shook, but not from fear. It was from anticipation. For months, I had been quietly observing everything Mr. Gibson did. The mismanagement, the hidden financial discrepancies, the bribes disguised as company expenses. And now, he had made one fatal mistake, underestimating me. I took one last look at my computer screen. All the files he thought were confidential. I had backups. All the secrets he assumed were hidden. I had them documented. The world had been showing me the exit door, and I was about to step through it on my terms. That night, I left the office quietly as he expected. But my mind was racing. Because leaving the company didn't mean I was powerless. It meant I was planning. And when I returned, he wouldn't recognize the person who walked back in. Over the next few weeks, I disappeared from everyone's radar. Friends called. Emails went unanswered. Even Mr. Gibson must have assumed I had vanished for good. But behind closed doors, I was building something he could never see coming. I met with former clients, financial experts, and even the CEO's close advisors, people who had influence but had been kept in the dark by Mr. Gibson's lies. Every meeting was calculated. Every handshake was a piece of the puzzle. Every conversation was a step closer to reclaiming what I was owed. I wasn't just planning a return. I was planning a takeover, quiet, precise, and unstoppable. And then came the breakthrough, an invitation to a private meeting with the company owner himself. The opportunity wasn't random. It was orchestrated by someone who knew the truth about Mr. Gibson and me. I prepared meticulously. My appearance, my words, my demeanor. Every detail mattered. I couldn't afford a single misstep. On the day of the meeting, I walked into the owner's office with confidence. He looked up, curious but cautious. "You're Amanda, right?" he said. "Yes," I replied. "I think you deserve to know the truth about what's been happening under your management." His eyes narrowed, and in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. The owner, Mr. Laurent, listened quietly as I laid out the details: mismanaged funds, shady deals, missing contracts, and the manipulations Mr. Gibson had hidden for years. Every word I spoke had evidence behind it, documents, emails, and recordings I had carefully collected. When I finished, there was a long silence. The weight of the truth hung in the air. Mr. Laurent leaned back in his chair, staring at me with a mix of surprise and respect. "You've done your homework," he said finally. "This explains a lot." I nodded. "It should, and I have more if you want the full picture." He smiled faintly. "I do. But tell me one thing. Why did you let him force you out quietly instead of fighting him sooner?" I leaned forward. "Because sometimes letting people underestimate you is the most powerful weapon. I didn't just leave. I prepared. I built alliances. And now I'm back on my terms." For the first time, I saw him consider me differently, not just as an employee, but as someone with vision, intelligence, and drive. You have guts, Amanda. That's rare. I smiled faintly. Not just guts. Strategy. The room was tense, almost cinematic, the kind of silence before a storm breaks. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that he might have just found someone he could truly trust. And then came the thought that made my heart race. If I played this right, I could return not as a mere employee, but as a partner. And Mr. Gibson would never see it coming. A week later, Mr. Laurent called again. This time, it wasn't a meeting, it was an offer. Amanda, I've reviewed everything you provided, and I think you've earned more than just a job here, he said. I want you to join me as a partner in the company, not just as an executive, but as someone who can oversee operations, finances, and decisions that matter. My chest tightened. This was beyond what I had dared to imagine. My plan was working perfectly. And what about Mr. Gibson? I asked carefully. He leaned back, smiling faintly. Let's just say he won't have the authority he thought he did anymore. I smiled inside. My silent revenge was already in motion. I hadn't just returned. I had returned with power, leverage, and respect. The employees who had whispered behind my back, the manager who thought he could push me out quietly, and the world that underestimated me, none of them had any idea what was coming. As I walked out of Mr. Laurent's office, I felt a surge of exhilaration. The city outside reflected in the glass, but I didn't see the skyline. I saw opportunity, strategy, justice. I was Amanda, the quiet employee who disappeared, the mastermind who prepared, and now the partner who would rewrite the rules. And Mr. Gibson? He was about to learn exactly what happens when someone underestimates you. The day I returned as Mr. Laurent's partner, I walked into the office with calm confidence. The moment I stepped through the doors, whispers spread like wildfire. People stared, some in awe, others in disbelief. Mr. Gibson noticed me immediately. His eyes narrowed. Amanda, what are you doing here? I smiled faintly, letting the tension linger. I'm back, I said simply. And I think it's time to discuss some things you've been trying to hide. His face turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because the owner seems to think differently. And he's given me authority to review operations, finances, contracts. The office went quiet. Every employee who had feared Mr. Gibson now looked at me with hope and curiosity. I walked past his desk, letting him see my confidence, my control. This was more than a comeback. This was a takeover. He muttered something under his breath and left the room, but I didn't follow. I let him stew. I pulled up the files I had meticulously reviewed, evidence of his mismanagement, hidden deals, and attempts to undermine me. Every paper, every document, every email perfectly documented. And I smiled, because now I held all the cards. Mr. Gibson thought he had silenced me. He didn't know I had disappeared to prepare my return. And now, the game had completely changed. I spent the next few days quietly reorganizing the office hierarchy. Every department I touched, I left in perfect order. People noticed the changes but didn't know I was the driving force yet. Mr. Gibson tried subtle resistance. He sent emails attempting to assert authority, but each one was intercepted. I had the owner's full trust, and I knew every weakness in the office politics he relied on. Then came the first test. A major client called, complaining about a contract that Mr. Gibson had mishandled. He wanted to fix it himself, but I stepped in. Don't worry, I said calmly. We've reviewed everything, and here's the correct solution. By the end of the call, the client was satisfied, praising my efficiency. Mr. Gibson glared at me, but I ignored him. Later, I walked past the conference room and noticed him talking to HR, his voice low and tense. He thought he could plot quietly. He didn't know the owner had already briefed me on everything he had done behind the scenes. I smiled. Every move he made, every attempt to undermine me, was now visible to me. And the more he tried, the faster I could build my comeback. I had disappeared quietly, yes. But now, every whisper, every secret, every mistake of his was a weapon I could use. And the office would watch him fall. The turning point came when I discovered a hidden account Mr. Gibson had created, funneling company funds into offshore investments under fake names. I had suspected he had been stealing, but the proof was finally undeniable. I copied every file onto a secure drive, carefully encrypting it and sending a duplicate to Mr. Laurent. The system I had set up for transparency ensured no alteration could go unnoticed. The next morning, I called a private meeting with the owner. "He's been diverting funds," I said, sliding the drive across the table. Mr. Laurent's eyes widened. "Do you have proof?" "Everything," I replied. "Accounts, transactions, emails, approval records. I've documented months of activity." He leaned back, impressed. I trusted him. "I didn't know. Neither did anyone else," I said softly. "But it ends now. He can't hide anymore." That afternoon, I organized a review of all financial and operational records. Employees who had feared speaking up came forward with their own observations, creating a perfect chain of evidence against Mr. Gibson. I could feel the tension building. He suspected something was happening, but he couldn't trace the power shift. He had thought I left quietly. He hadn't realized I was preparing my silent revenge. By the end of the week, the board had all the proof. Mr. Gibson was cornered, and I was no longer just an employee. I was the partner who controlled the narrative, the evidence, and the outcome. And he had no idea it was coming. The day of the confrontation arrived. Mr. Laurent called both Mr. Gibson and me into his office. I walked in confidently, dressed sharply, carrying only the calm certainty of someone who held all the cards. Mr. Gibson tried to mask his fear. "I don't know what this is about," he said, attempting arrogance. I slid the evidence across the table. "This is about transparency, about accountability, about your mismanagement and attempts to undermine the company while pretending to be in control." The board members, who had been invited secretly, reviewed the files. Faces went pale as they traced every irregularity, every hidden transaction, every deceitful email. Mr. Gibson tried to explain, to deflect blame, but the evidence was undeniable. The camera recordings, digital signatures, and financial proofs all pointed to him. "You forced Amanda to resign quietly because you thought she would disappear," Mr. Laurent said calmly. "But she didn't. She returned stronger, prepared, and with everything documented. I remained quiet, letting the truth settle. Every whisper, every doubt in the room, settled on him. His arrogance had cost him control. By the end of the meeting, Mr. Gibson was stripped of authority. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence in the room was enough. And for the first time, I realized the real power wasn't in fighting him directly. It was in preparation, patience, and timing. After the confrontation, the office changed overnight. Employees who had once feared Mr. Gibson now approached me with respect, some even awe. I had become more than a partner. I had become a symbol of competence and strategy. He lingered in the background, trying to whisper threats, but nobody listened. The owner's trust shielded me completely. I spent my days reorganizing operations, streamlining processes, and ensuring the company was protected from future sabotage. Every corner Mr. Gibson had manipulated was corrected. Every system he had exploited was fortified, and I watched him closely, letting him feel powerless. Every tense glance, every whispered apology to staff, every futile attempt to regain control only cemented my satisfaction. I had been forced out quietly. He thought he won, but he had no idea the quiet exit was only the beginning. By the end of the month, I had fully established my authority, not just as a partner, but as the person Mr. Gibson feared the most. Every plan he had hatched to undermine me had been neutralized. And as I looked across the office, seeing my colleagues working efficiently and confidently, I knew the final step of my revenge was approaching. Because the person who forces someone out quietly will never see them return as the one in control. It wasn't enough to simply reclaim my position. Mr. Gibson had humiliated me, tried to erase my contributions, and misled the board for years. I needed him out completely, exposed, powerless, and unable to threaten anyone again. I started digging deeper. Not just finances, but his personal dealings, side contracts, and communications with shady vendors. Every secret he had hidden in the shadows of the company surfaced under my scrutiny. Each revelation was carefully documented. I didn't act rashly, I planned. Patience had become my weapon. Every interaction with him was measured. I let him feel secure, believing he was still untouchable. One afternoon, I called Mr. Laurent. I've gathered enough evidence to secure the company completely, I said. But we need to act carefully. Timing is everything. He trusted me implicitly now. Do what's necessary, he replied. With that, I orchestrated the first internal audit. Everything Mr. Gibson had tried to cover up came to light. Hidden approvals, falsified documents, even bribes disguised as operational costs. Employees whispered behind closed doors, but none dared challenge me. My authority had become absolute. And then came the perfect moment. I scheduled a private meeting with the board, without Mr. Gibson knowing. I had become the quiet storm, invisible yet unstoppable. When the board saw the evidence, they were shocked, but also relieved. Mr. Gibson's empire of lies was crumbling, and I was at the center, calm, collected, and untouchable. He thought forcing me out would silence me. He had no idea the real power was just beginning. The day the board officially reviewed the evidence, I walked into the conference room with quiet confidence. Mr. Gibson tried to mask his anxiety, adjusting his tie, straightening papers, tiny gestures that betrayed him. Mr. Gibson, I began, the files you've seen are only a fraction of what has been discovered. The discrepancies, the hidden accounts, the manipulations, all documented, all verified. The room was silent. He swallowed hard. You can't prove that, he stammered. I smiled faintly. Every transaction is logged. Every email, every signature, every deviation from company policy, you left a trail. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I would leave quietly. You were wrong. The board members exchanged glances. Shock and anger mixed on their faces. Mr. Laurent leaned forward. Amanda, these are serious allegations. Are they accurate? I nodded. Every single one. And I have more if needed. The company deserves transparency. You deserve justice. Mr. Gibson's face went pale. You're manipulating them against me. I shook my head. No. The truth manipulates no one. It stands on its own. You did this to yourself. By the end of the meeting, the decision was clear. Mr. Gibson would be removed from all operational roles immediately. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply walked out, letting the weight of the truth do the work. The quiet employee who left the company, she had returned as the one who could no longer be ignored. Over the next few days, I implemented the first wave of changes. Department heads who had silently suffered under Mr. Gibson's mismanagement now reported directly to me. Employees approached cautiously at first. Some whispered gratitude. Others looked skeptical, unsure if this was temporary. But my actions spoke louder than words. Contracts were corrected. Financial gaps were closed. Projects delayed under his orders were completed flawlessly. Mr. Gibson lingered in the background, trying to regain his influence. Every attempt failed. Every email he sent to manipulate staff or influence decisions was intercepted. The owner had given me full authority. Then came the pivotal moment. I discovered he had been secretly diverting client payments to offshore accounts. Millions siphoned over months. The documents were hidden cleverly, but nothing escaped my scrutiny. I compiled the evidence and presented it to the board and Mr. Laurent personally. Their reactions were immediate. Shock, disbelief, and finally decisive action. You've done what I couldn't, Mr. Laurent admitted quietly. You've safeguarded the company completely. I nodded. That's my responsibility now. And it's not just for the company. It's for everyone who has been wronged under his rule. Mr. Gibson realized fully that his era of dominance was over, and the whispers around the office changed. From fear of him to awe of me, the quiet girl forced out, she had returned to rewrite the rules. It was time for the final confrontation. I requested a private meeting with Mr. Gibson under the guise of reconciliation. He arrived, smug and cautious, thinking he could manipulate the conversation. Amanda, he said, I hope we can resolve this peacefully. You've been through a lot, but maybe we can work together. I leaned forward, calm and poised. I've worked peacefully long enough. You forced me out quietly, thinking it would silence me. But I didn't leave, I prepared. He blinked, uncertainty flashing across his face. I slid a folder across the desk. Every offshore account, every falsified document, every attempt to cover up your mismanagement, it's all here. The owner has it. The board has it. And I have copies. His face went pale. You can't do this." "I already have," I said softly. "You're finished, Mr. Gibson. Your authority ends today." He trembled, realizing he had underestimated me. I left the office without another word, letting him absorb his defeat. And as I walked down the corridor, the employees' eyes followed me. Some were smiling, others shocked, but all aware that the balance of power had shifted forever. The quiet employee forced out quietly. She was now the one writing the company's destiny. And Mr. Gibson? He was powerless to stop it. Weeks passed, and the company flourished under my guidance. Systems were streamlined, corrupt contracts corrected, projects executed efficiently. Employees now trusted leadership and worked with confidence. Mr. Gibson was sidelined, stripped of authority, and under formal investigation. He tried subtle intimidation, whispers to clients, and even secret messages to staff, but every move was neutralized. His network of control had been dismantled completely. Meanwhile, I began attending strategy meetings with Mr. Laurent, discussing expansions, investments, and partnerships. Every decision I made strengthened my authority and the company's position. Employees now referred to me not just as a partner but as a strategist, someone who could anticipate problems and prevent crises before they happened. One evening, I watched Mr. Gibson leave the building, his shoulders slumped, defeated. The people he had tried to manipulate whispered among themselves, relieved he was gone. I smiled faintly. This was more than victory. It was justice. The quiet Amanda, who left quietly, had returned as a force to be reckoned with. And Mr. Gibson? He had learned the hard way that underestimating someone doesn't just lead to defeat, it leads to total obliteration. The company wasn't just safe. It was mine to protect, to guide, and to lead. And anyone who had thought they could push me aside would never forget the price of underestimating me. By now, the office had completely shifted. Whispers of fear about Mr. Gibson were replaced by quiet admiration for me. I walked past employees and noticed subtle nods, small smiles, gestures of acknowledgement. They had watched a quiet underdog return and rewrite the rules. Mr. Gibson, meanwhile, lingered at his desk, nervously tapping papers, trying to appear busy. He thought he could regain influence. He didn't realize the tide had turned permanently. I reviewed his remaining files carefully. A few small irregularities remained, nothing major, but enough to ensure he could never rise again. The board had already decided on disciplinary action, but I wanted the final blow to be meticulous. One afternoon, I called a meeting with him. "Mr. Gibson, I want to discuss your future here," I said calmly. He raised an eyebrow, thinking he could charm or intimidate me. "Amanda, let's not be hasty. We can work this out." I held up a folder. "This is a summary of your decisions, manipulations, and mismanagement. The board has reviewed it, and it's clear. Your role here is finished. Completely." His face twisted in disbelief and rage. You can't do this." I leaned forward, letting the words hit hard. "I already have. You forced me out quietly, thinking it would silence me. It didn't. And now, the company, its employees, and its future are protected. Your authority is over." The silence afterward was deafening. He realized fully that the game had ended, and he had lost completely. Once Mr. Gibson was officially removed from all operational duties, I focused on restoring trust within the company. Teams that had suffered under his manipulation were now empowered. I restructured departments, reassigned responsibilities, and ensured accountability at every level. Employees approached me cautiously at first. Some were skeptical, some relieved, and a few outright nervous. But I made it clear, the company's success was a collective effort, and transparency was non-negotiable. I noticed Mr. Gibson lurking in corners, trying to whisper rumors or sabotage minor operations. Each attempt was neutralized discreetly. The board had granted me authority to oversee every transaction, every project, and every communication. I had built alliances with key clients and investors during my time away. These connections now strengthened my position further. Projects that had been delayed under Mr. Gibson's rule were completed flawlessly. Revenue increased. Confidence soared. One evening, as I walked through the office, I overheard a colleague whispering to another, "Amanda turned the entire company around. She's unstoppable." I smiled faintly. It was true, but I hadn't even revealed my full strategy yet. Mr. Gibson's downfall was inevitable. And the quiet, forced resignation, that was the first act of a story that would end with him powerless and me in control. Then came the final revelation, the hidden offshore accounts Mr. Gibson had been secretly siphoning. I had discovered them weeks earlier but had deliberately kept them under wraps until the perfect moment. I compiled a detailed report with all evidence, cross-checked every transaction, and ensured the documentation was flawless. No one could argue against it. I presented the findings directly to the board and Mr. Laurent. Their reactions were immediate: shock, disbelief, and finally decisive action. Mr. Gibson's schemes were laid bare for the first time, and there was no room for excuses. "You've done exceptional work, Amanda," Mr. Laurent said quietly. "This is beyond what we expected." I nodded. "I simply ensure the company is protected. Justice has to be clear, precise, and complete." Mr. Gibson realized his empire of deceit had crumbled entirely. Every whispered threat, every bribe, every manipulated decision had been exposed. The office, once fearful of his authority, now looked at me with awe, respect, admiration, even fear. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence of truth and the inevitability of his defeat were punishment enough. And as I left the meeting, I knew the final phase of my plan was approaching, the part where he would feel powerless in every sense, and the company would finally be mine to guide, protect, and lead. I called Mr. Gibson into my office under the guise of a final discussion. He arrived, confident yet wary, trying to appear composed. "Amanda," he began, "I think we should resolve this quietly. We've both been through a lot." I held up a folder filled with evidence. "Resolve nothing. You forced me out quietly, thinking it would silence me. I didn't leave, I prepared." His face drained of color. You can't do this." "I already have," I replied calmly. "The board knows everything. The owner knows everything. Your manipulation, your mismanagement, and your hidden accounts are all documented. You're finished." He tried to argue, tried to manipulate, but every word was met with silence from me and the knowledge that the board already controlled the narrative. I let him stew, letting the weight of his defeat sink in fully. The quiet resignation he forced on me had been the perfect setup for his total downfall. By the end of the conversation, he slumped in his chair, powerless, realizing his era of control was over. And as he left my office, I knew the company had shifted permanently. The quiet employee who disappeared had returned, not just as a partner, but as the ultimate authority. Weeks later, the company thrived. Systems were restored, employees empowered, and profits increasing. Projects delayed under Mr. Gibson were completed with flawless execution. The office buzzed with confidence and trust. Mr. Gibson's attempts to regain influence were futile. Every move he made was countered by the structures I had put in place. His whispers and intimidation attempts were powerless against authority backed by truth, documentation, and the owner's trust. I worked closely with Mr. Laurent, attending strategy meetings, overseeing financial decisions, and planning new expansions. Every decision I made solidified my control and strengthened the company. Employees now referred to me as a strategist, someone capable of protecting the company and its people. They trusted my judgment implicitly. One evening, I watched Mr. Gibson leave the building, defeated and humiliated. The fear he once commanded had evaporated. I smiled faintly. This was more than victory, it was justice. The quiet Amanda forced out had returned as the one in control. And Mr. Gibson? He had learned the hard way that underestimating someone doesn't just lead to defeat, it leads to total obliteration. The company was safe. It was thriving. And I held the power to guide its destiny. The stage was set for the final act, the complete conclusion of Mr. Gibson's downfall, and my ultimate triumph. The day came to present Mr. Gibson's final verdict to the board. I walked in quietly, letting the weight of anticipation build. Employees and executives alike sensed the tension. Mr. Gibson tried to appear calm, but his nervous glance betrayed him. "Amanda," he began, "I hope we can resolve this." I held up the folder of evidence. "There's nothing to resolve. The documents, the accounts, and the records all speak for themselves. Your actions, your manipulations, your deceit, all verified." The board members reviewed the files silently. Shock spread across their faces as they traced hidden transfers, falsified contracts, and mismanaged operations. Mr. Gibson's face grew pale. "You've orchestrated this meticulously," Mr. Laurent said, eyes steady. "And the evidence is undeniable. Mr. Gibson, your role here is terminated effective immediately." He sputtered, trying to justify himself, but no one listened. His empire of influence had crumbled. I watched as he realized fully that his control was gone. He had underestimated me, thinking that a quiet exit would silence me. It hadn't. I had returned stronger, smarter, and prepared. And now, the company and its people were finally safe. With Mr. Gibson removed, I began reshaping the company completely. Departments were reorganized, systems strengthened, and accountability enforced at every level. Employees who had suffered under his rule were empowered to take initiative. The office atmosphere shifted. Fear was replaced with respect, admiration, and cautious optimism. People began trusting leadership again, and the company thrived. I reviewed every hidden corner Mr. Gibson had manipulated. Every backdoor, every loophole, every mismanaged account was corrected. I left nothing unchecked. Meanwhile, he tried subtle intimidation, whispering rumors to staff and clients alike. But the board's trust in me and the evidence of his wrongdoing made him powerless. I had transformed from the quiet employee he forced out to the one steering the company's future. And each time he realized he could no longer influence anything, I felt a quiet satisfaction. This was justice, not revenge for its own sake, but a precise, inevitable reckoning. The company was mine to guide, and he was nothing more than a cautionary tale. I began attending high-level meetings with Mr. Laurent, overseeing strategies, expansions, and partnerships. Every decision I made strengthened the company and secured my authority. Clients trusted me, investors respected me, and employees admired me. The company was thriving, but more importantly, it was secure. Every system was protected, every transaction monitored, and every department aligned with transparency. Mr. Gibson's former attempts to manipulate clients and projects now backfired completely. He had no authority, no respect, no power. The whispers of fear had turned into murmurs of his failure. I walked through the office one afternoon and overheard someone say, "Amanda is unstoppable." They were right. But the quiet triumph wasn't for ego. It was for the company and the people who deserved fairness and integrity. I smiled. The days of being underestimated were over. I was no longer just an employee or a partner. I was the person who safeguarded the company, its reputation, and its future. And Mr. Gibson? He had learned the hardest lesson. Those you push down quietly may return with a power you never imagined. A month later, the final pieces fell into place. Mr. Gibson had been formally investigated, his accounts frozen, and all his schemes fully exposed. The board decided he would have no further role in the company. Employees who had once feared him now whispered stories of Amanda, the one who had disappeared quietly and returned stronger, smarter, and unshakable. I continued refining operations, strengthening departments, and mentoring leaders. My authority was no longer questioned. The quiet girl forced out had become the ultimate strategist, guiding the company with precision and care. I often reflected on the journey, on the injustice, the humiliation, and the patience it took to return. Every setback had been a lesson, every slight a motivator. And now, standing at the top of the company hierarchy, I realized something powerful. Revenge wasn't about cruelty, it was about justice, foresight, and taking control. Mr. Gibson's downfall was complete, and I had orchestrated it with calm calculation. The company was safe, the employees were empowered, and I had finally claimed the place I deserved. Sitting in my office one evening, I looked out over the city lights, reflecting on everything that had happened. The quiet Amanda who had been forced out quietly was gone. In her place was someone respected, feared, and trusted. Mr. Gibson's legacy of manipulation had been erased. His arrogance and cruelty had led to his own downfall. He had underestimated me, not realizing that patience, intelligence, and strategy were my true strengths. I leaned back in my chair, the office quiet around me. Employees had begun calling me for advice, strategy, and guidance. The company thrived, its foundation secure, and its leadership honest. I smiled faintly. The journey had been painful, but it had forged me into someone stronger, sharper, and unstoppable. From humiliation to power, from forced resignation to ownership influence, I had rewritten the story on my terms. And as the city lights shimmered, I whispered to myself, the quiet ones should never be underestimated. Amanda was no longer just a name. She was the force behind a company, the mastermind of her own destiny, and the ultimate authority. And anyone who doubted her, they had learned the hard way. The story was complete. The company was safe. Justice and victory had been claimed.